Hi everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Army Painting Faces. In this video we're going to look at a simple recipe for black skin. Just like in part 1 where we looked at a simple recipe for white skin, there are tons of different shades and tons of different paints that you can use. But here's something to get you started. In part 1 I showed the video in its entirety in real time to give you an idea of roughly how long it's going to take you to complete. In this video I have sped up some of the steps, but I will tell you at the end of it roughly how long it took me. So to start out, our colours. We're going to use Vallejo model colour dark sea blue, scale 75 African shadow, scale 75 Indian shadow, Vallejo model colour basic skin tone, and lastly Vallejo model colour English uniform. Now I've got these paints on my wet palette and I'm going to thin them down quite a lot, so I'm going to load my brush with water, pull out a little bit of the paint and work with a very dilute mix. To begin with, let's base coat. Now if you're able to paint the head separately like I am here, then I would, if you have an airbrush, I would use that to get your base coat down. But I know a lot of models, their heads are either glued in or can't be separated, so we need to do our base coats with our brushes. So I thought I'd show you this over black. And we're starting here with Indian shadow, and this is going to be our mid-tone, as it were. We will work up from here and we will work down from here. It's took me about 3 layers of thin paint to get a nice base coat to work from. Now for our first highlight, I'm going to mix in a little bit of the basic skin tone. That's a little bit too light for the beginning one, so we'll mix it in and create a nice gradual step up. And just like in part 1, we're focusing on those areas that the light is going to hit from above, so it's the prominent features. This doesn't matter whether those features are theoretically in a recess. It's quite tricky when we're working with sculpts this small, because they aren't necessarily that correct, but we can still apply some of those rules. And again, if you're watching this, the chances are you don't just want a base coat and a wash. We're looking to elevate that army painting, picking the areas where we can spend a little bit more time, but where you can get a lot of bang for your buck. You see I'm working with thin paint here. It's important that I don't have too much of it on my brush. If I do, it's going to wick off the brush and flood the model. It's not going to flood it, it's not that thin, but you know what I mean. But because we're working with nice dilute thin layers of paint, it's drying pretty quickly. You can see we're already starting to bring the features out on the face. I've chosen to use exactly the same sculpt for this as I did for part 1. I've added a little bit more of the basic skin tone to the mix, and I'm focusing on the more prominent areas, so slightly smaller area than I did before. But we're looking at the brow, the nose, the gap between the top lip and the nose, the cheekbones, the chin where it juts out, the ears if I remember, which I don't normally. Because half the time the Space Marines haven't got ears on their heads anyway, they've got some sort of muff on there. Now if you really wanted to impress people, I suppose you could say you were sketching in your lights at this point. Stick that on a hashtag. But all we're doing is being careful but not worrying. Because we're using thin layers of paint, because we're building it up, it's going to be very easy for us to correct any mistakes we make. Now I've gone back to my Indian shadow, so our mid-tone, a much thinner mix of it this time, and I'm just going to glaze to blend the two different colours together. We did a whole video on glazing as a blending method on our Power Swords video, and I'll link it to the top. You see I was able to work with the same paint on my brush the whole time on this part because it's so dilute. I've loaded my brush. And as well as doing a little blending, I am also darkening some of those recesses that I know will be in shadow. Essentially the previous step was a bit messy, everything from here on out is refining. For the darkest parts, we're going to take our African shadow and add a little dot of dark sea blue into it, not too much. And then this guy's got quite prominent, sharp cheekbones, so we'll shade in underneath there, but not all the way to the bottom of the jawline, because you see that will come out slightly, so it's going to catch a bit of light. Then we're going around the eye sockets, under the nose. You see quite quickly the face is going to start to come together. As part of this series, I'm also going to look at if the majority of the model is skin. So I appreciate that we're working on a very small area at the moment. It's also a focal point area of a model. Very often it's the only bare skin that we'll see. So we might perhaps take these steps a little bit further than we would if we were working on, say, a bare torso or bare arms or whatever. But we'll discuss that in a future video. It's usually around this stage I forget about the ear. So all we're doing now is just adding a little bit of shadow around the back of the head. Sorry, we've lost focus there a little bit. Let's get it back. Now I've gone back to my Indian shadow here. Again, I'm just glazing between those three areas of colour that I've got. So the African shadow blue mix, the Indian shadow mid-tone, and that Indian shadow basic skin tone mix for the highlight. Now we add a little bit more basic skin tone and we do a further highlight. Again, just reinforcing. If I was doing this across an entire army, this particular skin tone, you would get quicker at it. You wouldn't have to go backwards and forwards so many times. Actually, thinking I might use this for an upcoming Slaves to Darkness army. I think it'll look pretty cool next to some light coloured armour. The nice part is we're about, I don't know, 12 minutes or so into this paint job in real time. So you could comfortably get this head done in a hobby session. think this head's off the Space Marine Plastic Mark III box set. It's a really nice one. It's one of the few ones that hasn't got too much sort of gubbins and bionics and stuff all over him, so it's a really nice one to practice on. If you want to stay within Games Workshop, there's a couple of sets of heads from Forge World for Stormcast Eternals that are nice. They'd be good pieces to practice on. And now I've taken the English uniform and created a very, very thin glaze. You can see I'm just glazing this all over the head. I'm being careful, I'm not just slopping it on. I've got very little on my brush. I'm moving it around, making sure it doesn't pool anywhere. So I try to end my brush stroke in a recess if I can. And there it's dry, and you can see it's just ever so slightly altered the colour. So now I want to work on his mouth, and I will go around the actual armour parts, black them out. You can see. So all I've done there is literally put some ivory on his teeth and some black on the armour. You can see it really frames the work we've done already, changes the look quite a lot. And now we're sort of going for that final refinement stage. Just like in part 1, I honestly don't think for army painting we need to be worrying about painting the whites of the eyes, but by all means go for it. But on the tabletop this is already going to look fantastic. So for his bottom lip, I've just added a little bit more blue to our shadow mix, and then I've highlighted it with pure African shadow. I'm really happy with how this one's coming out. And now I've gone in with an even lighter highlight. It's almost pure basic skin tone. Very delicately just rubbing a bit off there with my finger. Glaze back over it with Indian shadow. And it's gone, we're good. I just felt like the features on the right hand side of his face weren't quite defined enough. You can see a tiny bit of work all of a sudden. Looks much more even now. Tweaking the shadows, and at this stage it's done. It's obviously done, but I like to fiddle and tweak with it, so maybe just give yourself 20 minutes and that's all you can do. And here he is. Now, as I said at the start of the video, this is just one simple recipe. Same as we've got a simple recipe for our Caucasian skin, we're going to do a simple recipe for black skin, we'll do a simple recipe for very, very pale, almost dead flesh, and we'll also have a couple of others coming up as well. But I really encourage you to go out, look at some reference photos, look at your paint collection. It's not necessarily always going to be the paints that say they're for skin that you want to use. Just have a look at that spread of colours that we've used on both the heads and see what you can come up with. If you're interested in taking painting skin a lot further, probably on slightly larger models as well, then check out our Patreon. We've got a bunch of different videos on there covering all sorts of techniques, recipes and theory surrounding the subject. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button. If you want to support us, hit subscribe and pop a comment down below. And I'll see you next time.